Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a tale so old and so very, very boring, you'll be fast asleep before a god can even think about turning into a swan. I want you to imagine for a moment that you're an all-powerful deity lounging on a cloud high above Mount Olympus. You're feeling pretty good about yourself, maybe a little too good. The sun is warm on your face, the nectar is sweet, and you're just enjoying the celestial breeze. But then you hear it, the faintest sound of your divine wife, Hera, coming home. And she is not in a good mood. Suddenly, that comfy cloud feels like a hot frying pan. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story, like so many good ones, starts with the all-father of the Greek pantheon, Zeus. Now, Zeus was a lot of things. He was the god of the sky, the king of the gods, and the fellow with a lightning bolt, who probably had to pay for a lot of damaged property on a regular basis. He was also, and this is a bit of a mainstream fact that you might know, notoriously unfaithful to his wife, Hera. In fact, his infidelity is one of the most defining characteristics of his mythos. He was a bit like a medieval king who thought all the pretty maidens in the kingdom were his for the asking. Except, with more clouds and thunder. He had a wandering eye that stretched across the entire mortal realm, and even into the oceans and underworld, and he would use his divine powers to trick and seduce mortal women goddesses alike. But his most frequent target was mortal women. It was as if he considered his marriage vows to be more of a suggestion than a rule. Hera, as you can probably guess, was not a fan of this behavior. She was the goddess of marriage and childbirth, which put her in a bit of a difficult spot. It's like being the head of the company that sells alarm clocks, while your spouse is an executive who insists on sleeping in every day. So, she was always on the lookout. Her godly senses, fine-tuned by eons of suspicion, were her main tool. And on one particular day, she felt a shift in the air, a certain wrongness in the celestial order. She noticed a sudden, dense cloud settling over the land of Argos, a place she particularly favored. This was a classic Zeus move. He loved to obscure his dalliances with heavy, thick clouds. It was his signature. You could almost hear him thinking, "Oh, just a little atmospheric anomaly. Nothing to see here." It was a bit like a husband in the modern age, suddenly getting a text from Greg from work that just says, "Urgent meeting at 2 a.m., and then turning off his phone. You just know something's up. Hera, however, was not so easily fooled. She began to descend from Olympus, her serene expression slowly replaced by a furrowed brow of suspicion. She moved through the heavens with a silent purpose, the air around her growing colder as she approached the land of Argos. She could feel a strange tension in the world below, an unnatural calm. And in the center of that unnatural calm, tucked away beneath Zeus's very own personal, fluffy little storm cloud, was a mortal woman named Ai. Oh, she was a priestess of Hera, a fact that would have been a quirky little tidbit of historical irony if the situation weren't so dire. She was one of Hera's own. Zeus had seen her, as he saw so many others, and decided he wanted her for himself, leading to this very predictable and very dramatic confrontation. Now, scholars still debate whether Zeus was truly in love with these mortals or simply driven by a fleeting impulse, but in the end, it really didn't matter. The results were always the same: a jealous goddess, a terrified mortal, and a whole lot of divine chaos. Hera, moving with a silent grace that would make a ghost seem clumsy, began to descend from the celestial heights, her eyes fixed on that single, suspicious cloud. It was a cloud that had no business being there, a cloud that was clearly hiding something. Back on the ground, in the middle of this cozy, impromptu little cloud cave, Zeus and Io were enjoying a peaceful, albeit tense, moment. Zeus, in his typical fashion, had not considered the possibility that his very, very predictable wife would see through his very, very transparent disguise. It was a divine comedy of errors, really. As Hera got closer, the air grew thick with a palpable sense of dread. Zeus, ever the master of the last-minute pivot, felt her presence. He felt that cold, suspicious air, and he knew his time was up. He couldn't just vanish. That would be an admission of guilt. He couldn't fight her. That would be a mess. And he certainly couldn't just introduce Io as a friend. This was a tricky situation, even for a god who had a knack for getting out of tricky situations. It was in this moment of pure, unadulterated panic that Zeus did what Zeus always did. He came up with a terrible, yet deeply creative solution. He looked at Io, this beautiful priestess of his wife, and a thought as random and as chaotic as a lightning bolt struck him. He would turn her into an animal. An animal, he reasoned, would be a harmless enough sight. A cow. Yes, a cow. A lovely, gentle, white cow. Who would suspect a thing? A cow is just a cow, right? In his mind, it was a perfectly executed plan. He waved his hand, and with a soft flash of divine energy, the priestess Io was gone. In her place stood a perfect milk-white heifer, with eyes that still held the confused human soul of the woman she once was. This is a mainstream historical fact you might recognize. This particular transformation is one of the most famous examples of Zeus's shape-shifting abilities in Greek mythology. But it's also a deeply poignant one because of the helplessness it imposes on Io. Oh, you can just imagine it, can't you? You're a woman, minding your own business, and then, in an instant, you're a cow. You're confused. You're probably a little grossed out. You suddenly have 4 legs, a tail, and a newfound desire to chew cud. It's a bit of a low-grade cosmic prank, a quirky, fringe tidbit that feels more like something from a slapstick cartoon than a serious myth. Just as the transformation was complete, Hera landed gently on the ground, her face a mask of serene calm that did not fool anyone, least of all Zeus. The cloud, her original target, was gone, dispersed into a pleasant wisp of nothingness. But in front of her stood Zeus, looking a little too nonchalant, and a stunningly beautiful white cow. She looked from Zeus to the cow, and back again. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, her silence more terrifying than any thunderclap. Her gaze lingered on the cow's large, sad eyes, which seemed to hold an intelligence that a mere cow shouldn't possess. A cow is not a cow is not a cow, she thought. Zeus, trying to play it cool, patted the cow on the flank and said, "Oh, this? This is just a cow I found. Isn't she a beautiful specimen?" It was a terrible lie, delivered with the nonchalant air of a man trying to explain why there's a new sports car in the driveway. Hera, ever the patient and cunning goddess, just smiled. "She is indeed a beautiful cow," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that could curdle milk. "So beautiful, in fact, that I would very much like to have her. You know, as a gift." Zeus was trapped. To refuse would be to admit his lie. To agree would be to hand over his mistress to the one person in the universe who would take the most sadistic pleasure in her misery. He was in a cosmic checkmate. He had to hand over the cow, this magnificent, perfect creature that he had just created, to his wife. A truly awkward moment, wouldn't you say? Historians still argue about whether Hera was genuinely fooled by the cow, or if she simply played along to trap Zeus in his lie, but I think the answer is pretty obvious. No one is that good at lying, and no one is that bad at seeing through a lie. With a sigh that was probably more a whimper, Zeus handed over the pristine white cow to his wife. A cow that, in a quirky little tidbit of mythical history, was just moments ago a person. Can you imagine the divine awkwardness? It's like your spouse giving you a new puppy, but you have the sneaking suspicion that the puppy is actually their ex-lover. You smile. You say thank you, but in your heart, you know you're going to put that puppy in the most inconvenient, annoying situation you possibly can. And so Hera, ever the goddess of strategic pettiness, accepted the gift and decided she needed a proper security system. Now, Hera was a god, so she didn't just get a fence or a particularly angry dog. She needed something truly grand, a watchman who was, in a word, inescapable. And so, she summoned Argos Panoptes. Now, for a mainstream fact, Argos was no ordinary giant. The name Panoptes literally means all-seeing, and for good reason. He had 100 eyes. Yes, 100. All over his body. Some sources say it was 100 eyes in total. Others that he just had eyes all over his head and body. But the core fact remains, the dude had a lot of eyes. He was the perfect security guard. He never slept all at once. When he needed to rest, he would close a few of his eyes at a time, but he always kept a vigilant watch with the others. He was, for all intents and purposes, the ancient Greek equivalent of 100 security cameras that were all running at once. Hera gave the cow, Io, to Argos with very simple instructions. Keep watch all the time. And so, Io, in her bovine form, was tied to an olive tree, forced to graze on bitter herbs, and constantly watched by 100 unblinking eyes. You can imagine the psychological torment. You can't run. You can't hide. Every time you turn around, there are a dozen eyes staring at you from the giant's stomach or his elbow. It's a truly chilling image, and it's a fringe fact that this particular myth serves as a metaphor for the paranoia and surveillance that can come with absolute power. You're never truly alone. Io's days turned into a monotonous, miserable cycle. She longed for her human form, for her family, for a moment of peace and quiet. She couldn't speak, only moo, a sound that was so frustratingly inadequate for expressing her torment. You could almost hear the gentle, sleepy narration of her thoughts. Moo, I wish I had opposable thumbs. Moo, I miss my hair. Moo, why, Zeus? Why did you have to turn me into a cow? It's one of those darkly funny details that makes these myths so enduring. The tragedy is so profound, but the circumstances are so utterly absurd. She tried to communicate with her father, Inachus, when he came to the fields, but all she could do was moo, and he didn't understand. She traced her name, Io, in the dust with her hoof, and her father finally understood the terrible fate that had befallen his daughter. It was a heart-wrenching moment, and it's a detail that reminds us that even in these ancient, fantastical stories, there's a deeply human core of love and grief. All the while, Argos just watched. He didn't blink. He didn't get bored. His 100 eyes, like 100 tiny marbles, just kept rolling around, taking in every detail of the cow's existence. He was the most boring, most effective security guard in all of history. And historians still argue whether Argos was a physical being, or more of a symbolic representation of Hera's omnipresent jealousy. But either way, his effect on Io was very, very real. She was trapped, and there seemed to be no way out of her bovine prison. The relentless gaze of 100 eyes was a far more cruel punishment than any physical cage. With Argos's 100 eyes fixed on her, Io's existence became a sad, slow, and bovine-flavored tragedy. She was the world's most beautiful and most miserable cow. Driven to distraction and deep despair, she eventually managed to break free from her olive tree tether. But her newfound freedom was no escape. Hera, in a final act of divine cruelty, sent a relentless gadfly to torment her. This wasn't just any fly. This was a monster of a bug, buzzing and stinging her relentlessly, driving her mad with irritation and pain. It was a torture so specific and so terrible that it forced Io to wander the entire known world, unable to find a moment of peace. You can just imagine the scene, A poor, white cow galloping across the Greek landscape, a buzzing, angry fly nipping at her heels. It's a bit of a quirky tidbit to think that the entire plot of a myth could be set in motion by a single determined bug. So Io's grand tour of the ancient world began. She tramped through Greece, her hooves clicking softly on the hard, sun-baked earth. She wandered across what we now know as the Ionian Sea, which, in a mainstream fact, is believed to have been named after her. She swam the straits that we now call the Bosphorus, which literally means ox ford or cow crossing in Greek, in another little tribute to her epic journey. This was her legacy, not as a priestess, not as a woman, but as a cow, driven mad by a god's punishment. It's a very weird and very boring claim to fame, but a claim to fame nonetheless. She wandered alone, a gadfly, a constant humming reminder of Hera's fury. She saw sights that no human, and certainly no cow, had ever seen. She crossed mountains, waded through rivers, and felt the hot wind of the deserts. Her journey was a quiet, sad procession, marked only by the gentle sound of her hooves and the incessant buzzing of her tormentor. There was no grand adventure here, just the slow, plodding misery of a creature who had lost everything. It was a pilgrimage of penance, a forced march to nowhere, and through it all, there was a sense of profound loneliness. She couldn't speak to anyone. She couldn't explain what had happened. She couldn't ask for help. She was a silent spectator to her own slow-motion downfall. Her moo was her only language, and it was a language that no one, save her father for a fleeting moment, understood. It's a deeply sad image, and one that is meant to lull you into a sleepy, meditative state. It's not about action or adventure. It's about the quiet, gentle unfolding of a tragic fate. Historians still argue about the exact route of Io's wanderings, with some believing her journey to be a mythological map of early Greek trade routes, while others see it as a purely symbolic journey. But for our purposes, it doesn't really matter. What matters is the quiet, persistent rhythm of her journey. It's the gentle click of hooves on stone, the soft sound of grass being chewed, and the low, mournful moo that echoes across the empty plains. It's the kind of sound that you can just let wash over you, a sound that promises nothing but the slow passage of time. And the constant buzz of that gadfly, well, that's just a little bit of ambient noise to help you drift off. Back on Mount Olympus, Zeus, who had been feeling a quiet, nagging guilt, was starting to get annoyed. Not by the thought of Io's suffering, mind you, but by the fact that Hera's security system was working so well. His cow mistress was being chased all over the ancient world by a bug, and her bodyguard, Argos Panoptes, was proving to be a highly effective, hundred-eyed inconvenience. Something had to be done. He couldn't just have a god-sized headache buzzing around in his cosmic consciousness forever. So Zeus, ever the problem solver, decided to call on his son, Hermes. Now, for a mainstream historical fact, Hermes was the messenger of the gods, a trickster, and the god of travelers, merchants, and thieves. He was a smooth talker and a master of clever schemes. He was, in short, the perfect man for the job. Zeus summoned Hermes and gave him his mission. Go to Argos, lull him to sleep, kill him, free the cow. It was a simple, elegant, and frankly, a bit ruthless plan. Hermes, being the good son that he was, accepted the task with a wry smile. He put on his winged sandals, grabbed his trusty caduceus, and set off. But Hermes knew that you couldn't just walk up to a hundred-eyed giant and ask him to take a nap. This required finesse. This required a plan. And a plan, in this case, meant music. In a quirky little tidbit, Hermes was also the god of music, and he had invented the lyre, a stringed instrument that he had made from a tortoise shell. But for this job, he needed something even more soothing. Something simpler. Something that could lull even the most vigilant, hundred-eyed giant into a deep, deep slumber. And so, he fashioned a simple shepherd's pipe, a reed instrument that made a soft, mournful sound. He disguised himself as a shepherd and began to play. He approached Argos, who was sitting on a hillside, his 100 eyes scanning the horizon, watching the cow graze in the distance. Hermes sat down a respectful distance away and began to play his pipe. The tune was slow. It was gentle. It was incredibly, profoundly boring. The kind of song you would play to help a baby fall asleep, or to lull a particularly restless field of corn into a state of quiet contemplation. One by one, Argos's eyes began to close. First, the 2 on his forehead, then the 4 on his chin, then the 1s on his knees. The song was so monotonous, so utterly devoid of excitement, that it began to wear down the giant's legendary vigilance. He tried to resist. He really did. But the gentle, persistent melody of the shepherd's pipe was a force of nature. It was like trying to stay awake in a warm, dark room while listening to the slow, rhythmic sound of rain on a window pane. It was simply not possible. As Argos's 100 eyes slowly, one by one, drifted shut, Hermes watched and waited. He kept playing his gentle, sleepy tune. He waited until every single one of the giant's eyes was closed, a feat that no one had ever managed to accomplish before. This was a critical moment in the story, and historians still argue whether Hermes' success was due to the hypnotic power of his music, or simply the fact that a god-level musician playing for an extended period of time is just incredibly tiring. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. Argos Panoptes, the all-seeing giant, was finally completely asleep. With every last one of Argos's 100 eyes finally closed, the hillside fell into a deep, supernatural quiet. The only sound was the soft sigh of the wind and the gentle, almost imperceptible breathing of the sleeping giant. Hermes, ever the master of the dramatic pause, ceased playing his shepherd's pipe. The silence was the real victory. It was a silence that promised an end to Io's torment, a silence that signaled the end of Hera's 100-eyed surveillance system. It was a beautiful, boring, and very, very sleepy moment. Hermes, however, was not one to dawdle. His mission was only half complete. He couldn't just leave Argos to wake up, stretch, and get back to the boring business of watching a cow. He had to finish the job. So in a quick and merciful move, Hermes drew a curved sword and swiftly, gently, cut off Argos's head. And with that, the all-seeing giant was no more. The 100 eyes, which had for so long been a symbol of relentless vigilance, were now closed forever. The hillside, once a place of tension and paranoia, was now just a peaceful field with a headless giant and a confused cow. But Hera, the goddess of petty revenge, was not one to let a good set of eyes go to waste. When she discovered her beloved watchman had been slain, she was understandably furious. She couldn't bring Argos back, but she could honor his memory in a way that was both beautiful and incredibly passive-aggressive. So she took his 100 eyes and in a quirky, little-known tidbit, she placed them on the tail of her sacred animal, the peacock. And in a mainstream fact, this is why peacocks have those magnificent eye-like spots on their tail feathers. It's a beautiful and incredibly boring explanation for one of nature's most stunning displays. Every time you see a peacock fanning out its tail, you're looking at the eternal memory of a 100-eyed giant who is bested by a sleepy song. It's a reminder that even in victory, Hera could still have the last word. She couldn't keep Io prisoner, but she could create a permanent, feathery monument to her jealousy. It's a testament to the fact that even when the gods lose, they still find a way to get a little bit of their own back. It's the kind of subtle, quiet revenge that you can really appreciate. It doesn't scream and shout. It just sits there, looking beautiful and a little bit ominous. With Argos gone, Io was finally free. But the gadfly, Hera's second-tier security system, was still buzzing away, driving her mad with its relentless stinging. Hermes' job was done, but Io's journey was far from over. She was still a cow. She was still being tormented. And she still had a very long way to go. The end of one chapter was just the beginning of another, and the slow, sleepy rhythm of her journey was about to pick up again. Historians still argue whether the peacock story was an original part of the myth or a later addition, meant to explain the bird's unique appearance, but for our sleepy time purposes, it's a great little detail to help you drift off. The gentle sound of a peacock's feathers rustling in the breeze, the soft, soothing colors of its magnificent tail. It's a very peaceful image to have in your mind as you fall asleep. Remember that Io is still out there, wandering, but the loudest of her tormentors is now just a pretty feather pattern. With Argos gone and his eyes adorning a peacock's tail, Io was free from one tormentor, but the gadfly, that persistent little buzzing nightmare, still chased her across the world. Her journey continued, a slow, gentle, and utterly exhausting pilgrimage. She crossed continents, a quiet, white smudge on the vast landscape. She traveled from Greece all the way to what we now call Egypt, a place that, in this story, represented the end of her long, hard road. In this ancient land of pyramids and pharaohs, she finally found peace. This is a mainstream fact that you might find interesting. Egypt was considered a safe haven, a place beyond the reach of Hera's direct power and jealousy. Io's arrival there marked the end of her wandering. She finally collapsed, exhausted, on the banks of the Nile River, and in a moment of pure, gentle relief, she was finally touched by Zeus. But this time, it was a touch of healing, not of lust. He gently stroked her, and with that divine touch, her bovine form began to soften, to melt away. Her hooves retracted, her tail disappeared, and her human form, the beautiful priestess she once was restored. She was finally Io again, a woman who had endured a great deal, but who had, in the end, found her way home. And with that, she gave birth to Zeus's son, Epaphus, whose name, in a quirky little tidbit, means he who is touched, in a direct reference to the way Zeus restored her. Her legacy, and this is a fascinating part of the story, didn't end there. Her son, Epaphus, would go on to be the ancestor of some of the most famous heroes in Greek mythology, including Heracles, a hero whose own story is full of trials and tribulations orchestrated by none other than Hera. It's a testament to the fact that you can't really escape the family drama of the gods. It just keeps going, generation after generation. This entire myth, which you can now let drift in and out of your sleepy thoughts, is a journey. It's a journey of escape, of endurance, and of eventual salvation. It's not a story about grand battles or heroic deeds. It's a story about the quiet misery of being caught in the crossfire of divine drama. It's about a woman who became a cow, and a cow who became a woman again. It's a very boring, very beautiful tale about the slow, gentle rhythm of life and the things we have to endure. Historians still debate whether Io's story was a way for the Greeks to explain the origins of their trade and travel routes, or if it was a cautionary tale about the dangers of attracting a god's attention. But I think, in the end, it's just a nice, quiet story to help you drift off. As the story fades, I want you to remember the soft, gentle sound of Io's hooves on the ground, the way the wind whispered in her ears as she crossed a great ocean, the soft, quiet moment of her transformation back into a woman on the banks of the Nile. These are the details you can hold on to as you slip away into sleep. Feel your body become heavy and relaxed. Let your mind become a calm, quiet place. The world of Greek myths and hundred-eyed giants is fading now, just like a dream when you first wake up. The story is over, and your mind is free to wander in its own quiet, peaceful way. The gentle hum of the world around you, the soft darkness of the room, are the only things that remain. Just relax now. Let go of everything. The stories, the images, the gentle rhythm of the tale, they are all gone. You are safe. You are warm. You are sleepy. You can finally rest.